Weddings used to make Serafina Vance cry because they were beautiful. Now they made her cry because they reminded her of what she'd buried. The Venetian Grand overlooking Lake Michigan was everything a society wedding should be. Candlelit, opulent, dripping with the kind of wealth that turned celebration into spectacle. She sat alone at table 9, the widow's table, as she'd privately named it, tucked between the ice sculpture and the emergency exit where servers navigated tight corners with trays of champagne that cost more than her monthly bills. Her late husband's family had placed her there deliberately, close enough to be seen, far enough to be forgotten. She kept her gaze fixed on her untouched wineglass, tracing the rim with one finger, willing the hours to pass. Her navy dress, appropriate, modest, forgettable, had been chosen specifically not to draw attention. The Vance family preferred their widow decorative and silent. Then a shadow fell across her table. She looked up. A man stood there, tall, dark-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost what she used to make in 6 months. His eyes were the color of espresso, sharp enough to see through every defense she'd spent 18 months constructing. He sat down beside her without asking. His arm slid around the back of her chair like it belonged there. "You've been sitting alone far too long," he said, his voice low and accented, Italian, dangerous. "Tonight, you're with me." Serafina's breath caught. With him? Across the ballroom, heads were already turning. Serafina had arrived at 6:45 to early enough to avoid the receiving line where Marcus's mother would have air-kissed her cheek while looking through her like expensive glass. The Ashford-Sterling wedding was the social event of the Chicago fall season, and Eleanor Vance had made it clear that Serafina's invitation was a formality, an obligation to Marcus's memory. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. "You'll sit with the Hendersons," Eleanor had informed her 3 days prior, her tone suggesting this was generous. "Distant family, they won't ask uncomfortable questions." The Hendersons hadn't shown up. Food poisoning, according to the whispered explanation that circulated through the cocktail hour, which left Serafina alone at a table set for 8. Surrounded by empty chairs that screamed her isolation louder than any gossip could. She'd watched the other guests arrive throughout the evening. Marcus's college friends, now successful in finance and law, their wives dripping in jewelry that caught the light from the crystal chandeliers. His cousins, who'd always treated Serafina like she'd trapped Marcus into marriage rather than loved him desperately. His business associates from the investment firm, men who'd sent flowers to the funeral but never called to check on the widow. The Venetian Grand was designed to make everyone feel like royalty. Marble floors imported from Tuscany, frescoed ceilings depicting classical love stories, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the lake, where boats bobbed with lights that mimicked the stars. The kind of venue that appeared in wedding magazines and cost more for 4 hours than Serafina had earned in her entire last year teaching at the Arts Academy. She'd given up teaching, given up her studio apartment in Wicker Park, given up everything when she married Marcus, moving into his Lincoln Park brownstone and learning how to be a Vance, which meant learning how to be seen but not heard, elegant but not interesting, present but not intrusive. And then he died, and she learned the cruelest lesson of all. Widows weren't Vances. They were reminders of tragedy, inconvenient, pitied, temporary. Serafina, darling, Eleanor Vance, materialized beside her table during the salad course, her silver gown shimmering in the candlelight. Marcus's father trailed behind her, looking uncomfortable the way he always did when forced to acknowledge his son's death. "You're sitting all by yourself. How dreadful." The concern in her voice was practiced, hollow. "The Hendersons couldn't make it," Serafina offered quietly. "I'm fine, Eleanor." "Yes, well." Eleanor's gaze swept over Serafina's navy dress, 2 seasons old, bought for another wedding when Marcus was still alive. "You really should have worn something more current. People notice these things." "People like you," Serafina thought but didn't say. "I'll remember that next time." she replied instead, the words tasting like ash. Eleanor leaned in conspiratorially, her perfume, Chanel No. 5, always overwhelming. I've seated you near the Castellanos. Lovely family. Old money. Antonio's son Luca is single, I believe. 34. Very handsome. Perhaps you might... She trailed off, but the implication hung heavy. 18 months since Marcus's car accident. Time to move on. Time to stop being a reminder. I'm not looking to meet anyone, Eleanor. Of course not, dear. The older woman straightened, her smile brittle. But you're still young. 29, 30? You'll want to think about your future. The brownstone is in Marcus's estate, of course, and we've been extraordinarily generous with the timeline, but... There it was, the threat wrapped in silk. I understand, Serafina said, because what else could she say? They moved on, circulating toward guests who mattered. Guests who hadn't made the mistake of loving and losing a Vance. Serafina picked at her salad and tried to remember why she'd come. Obligation? Grief? Some masochistic need to prove she could still function in the world Marcus had left behind? The ballroom buzzed with conversation. At table 3, she could see Marcus's brother Daniel laughing with his fiancée, their engagement having been announced 6 months after the funeral with indecent enthusiasm. At table 7, Marcus's college roommate Todd was already drunk, his wife looking mortified. At table 12, distant cousins she'd met twice discussed their upcoming trip to Positano. And at table 9, Serafina sat alone, a ghost at the feast. The storm began during the main course. She noticed it first as distant thunder, barely audible over the string quartet playing near the dance floor. Then the sky outside the windows darkened dramatically, clouds rolling in off the lake like something biblical. Within minutes, rain began to fall, not a gentle mist, but sheets of water that turned the window glass into abstract impressions of the city beyond. The weather forecast had promised clear skies all weekend. Guests murmured about the unexpected turn but quickly resumed their conversations. In Chicago, October weather was notoriously fickle. Serafina watched the storm and felt something kindred in it. The violence, the unpredictability, the way it didn't care about anyone's carefully laid plans. Marcus's widow. The voice came from behind her, male and familiar in the worst way. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Christopher Langdon, Marcus's former business partner, the man who'd contested the will, who'd suggested at the funeral reception, loudly enough for everyone to hear, that Serafina had married Marcus for his money. Christopher. She kept her voice neutral, her eyes on the storm. Sitting alone. How fitting. He'd moved around to face her now, drink in hand, his expression suggesting he'd had several already. I suppose the family finally realized you don't quite fit, do they? Marcus's little charity case. Heat flooded her cheeks. Please leave. Oh, I don't think so. See, I've been meaning to tell you something. He leaned down, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. We all knew what you were. A pretty face, from the wrong side of town who saw an opportunity. Marcus was too kind to see it, but the rest of us, that's enough. The voice came from her left, deep and commanding, cutting through Christopher's vitriol like a blade. Serafina turned, and there he was, the man from the bar, the one she'd noticed watching her earlier. Up close, he was devastating. Tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in Renaissance paintings, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from marble, and eyes that were currently fixed on Christopher Langdon with an intensity that made the other man take an involuntary step backward. Who the hell are you? Christopher blustered, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Someone who's asking you to leave. The stranger's accent was subtle but unmistakable, Italian, old world, the kind that suggested family roots that went back centuries. The lady isn't interested in conversation. The lady, Christopher started, but the stranger moved then, rising to his full height, and something in that movement made Christopher's words die in his throat. Serafina had seen predators before, in documentaries, in nature films, animals that didn't need to bare their teeth to establish dominance. This man was that kind of predator. Christopher backed away, mumbling something about finding his wife, and disappeared into the crowd with the haste of someone escaping danger. Serafina released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Thank you," she managed. "You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did." He sat down in the chair beside hers, the one Christopher had been looming over, not across from her, beside her. His arm slid around the back of her chair with casual possession. "You've been alone all evening. That ends now." "I'm sorry?" Her heart was suddenly racing, and not from Christopher's harassment. "My name is Raffaele Giordano." He said it like she should recognize it, and something in her memory stirred. Whispers at Marcus's funeral, mentions of Chicago families who operated outside the law, names spoken in hushed tones. "And tonight, you're going to act like you're with me." It wasn't a question, wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, delivered in a voice that expected obedience. "I don't understand," Serafina said, even as her body betrayed her, hyper-aware of how close he was, how his hand rested on the back of her chair, fingers almost but not quite touching her shoulder, how he smelled like expensive cologne and something darker, more dangerous. "You don't have to understand. You only have to play along." His gaze held hers, and she saw a calculation there, intelligence, and something else she couldn't quite name. "In approximately 30 seconds, people will notice I'm sitting here. They'll talk. They'll make assumptions. Let them." "Why?" The question came out breathless. "Because," Raffaele said, his hand moving now, settling warm and solid on her shoulder, claiming her in front of everyone. "You need protection, Serafina Vance, and I need a reason to stay at this wedding." Her name on his lips sent electricity down her spine. "How do you know my name?" "I make it my business to know names." His thumb moved slightly, a subtle caress against her collarbone that made her breath catch, especially the names of interesting women sitting alone at weddings while vultures circle. Across the ballroom, heads were turning. Eleanor Vance's face had gone pale. Daniel Vance had stopped mid-conversation. Christopher Langdon stood frozen near the bar, looking like he'd seen a ghost, or something worse than a ghost. "They're staring," Serafina whispered. "Good." Raffaele's voice was low, intimate, the kind of tone that made promises and threats in equal measure. "Let them stare. Let them wonder. Let them realize you're not alone anymore." "But I am alone," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "I've been alone since Marcus died. I'll be alone tomorrow. This is the beginning," Raphael interrupted, his eyes burning into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "If you let it be." Thunder crashed outside, shaking the windows. The storm had intensified, rain hammering against the glass with primal fury. Inside the ballroom, Serafina sat beside a man she didn't know, a man whose name carried weight and danger, a man who'd claimed her in front of Chicago's elite with nothing more than a touch and a command. And for the first time in 18 months, she felt something other than grief. She felt alive, terrified, and utterly unable to look away from Raffaele Giordano's knowing smile. Raffaele's hand remained on her shoulder, warm and possessive, while the ballroom processed what they were seeing. Serafina could feel the weight of 200 stares, the collective intake of breath that happened when something scandalous unfolded at a society wedding. Eleanor Vance was the first to approach, her silver gown cutting through the crowd like a battleship. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Serafina knew that look. She'd seen it at the funeral when someone had suggested Marcus's death might not have been an accident, controlled fury beneath a mask of civility. "Mr. Giordano," Eleanor's voice carried across the surrounding tables, not a greeting, an acknowledgement of danger. "I wasn't aware you'd accepted our invitation." "I don't need invitations, Mrs. Vance." Raphael's thumb traced a slow circle against Serafina's collarbone, a gesture so intimate that several nearby guests actually gasped. "I go where I'm needed." "And you're needed here?" Eleanor's gaze flickered to Serafina, cold and cutting. At my goddaughter's wedding? Sitting with my late son's widow? Especially here. Raffaele stood then, and the movement forced Eleanor back a step. He towered over Marcus's mother, his presence somehow filling the space around them. Serafina has been sitting alone all evening. That seemed uncivilized. I'm correcting the oversight. The emphasis on her first name, spoken with that Italian accent that turned syllables into something almost sensual, sent heat flooding through Serafina's body. How thoughtful, Eleanor said, the words dripping with venom disguised as gratitude. Though I'm sure Serafina would prefer to remain with family. Would you? Raphael looked down at Serafina, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that demanded honesty. Prefer to remain alone at table 9 while your family circulates without you? While men like Christopher Langdon corner you with their poisonous assumptions? Every eye in the vicinity was on her now. Eleanor's face had gone white. Daniel Vance had appeared at his mother's elbow, his expression warning Serafina not to make a scene. Even the bride, beautiful, oblivious Sophia Ashford Sterling, had stopped dancing to watch the drama unfolding near table 9. This was the moment. The choice. She could decline, could thank Raphael politely and send him away, could return to being the acceptable widow, the one who knew her place, the one who'd eventually be asked to vacate the brownstone and disappear from Vance family history. Or she could step off the cliff. No, Serafina heard herself say, her voice stronger than she'd expected. I wouldn't prefer that at all. Raphael's smile was slow, dangerous, victorious. Then you're with me tonight. He offered his hand, and she took it, feeling calluses that suggested this man did more than sign papers and issue orders. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength. Dance with me, Serafina. It wasn't a request. Eleanor started to protest, but Raphael was already leading Serafina toward the dance floor, his hand warm against the small of her back, guiding her through the parting crowd like Moses through the Red Sea. Behind them, the whispers ignited like wildfire. Did you see? Raffaele Giordano. Marcus's widow with that man. The Giordano family doesn't just... Someone should call. And Serafina, for the first time since the funeral, stopped caring what they said. Raphael pulled her into his arms, with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to touch what he wanted. One hand settled at her waist, the other captured hers, and suddenly Serafina was pressed against a body that felt like carved stone beneath expensive fabric. You're trembling, he observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the orchestra's rendition of something slow and romantic. Everyone's watching. She forced herself to meet his eyes and immediately regretted it. Up close, they were devastating, dark, intelligent, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. Let them watch. His hand tightened at her waist, pulling her closer than propriety allowed. Do you know who I am, Serafina? I've heard the name Giordano, she admitted. Marcus never spoke about your family. But others did. Whispered. Whispered what? That you control half of Chicago's underground, that politicians take your calls, that crossing your family is... She trailed off, suddenly aware of how dangerous this conversation was. Fatal, Raphael supplied, amusement flickering across his face. The rumors are only half wrong. We prefer negotiation to violence. But yes, when necessary, we're fatal. He said it so casually, like discussing the weather. Why are you doing this? Serafina asked. Help me. Claiming me in front of everyone. You don't know me. No, he agreed, spinning her smoothly across the floor. But I know them. The Vances. Old money and older cruelty. They've been circling you like sharks since your husband died, waiting for you to give them an excuse to dispose of you completely. The accuracy of his assessment stole her breath. And you care about that because... Because I need something from you. There it was. The truth beneath the charm. Your in-laws have been resistant to certain business propositions, real estate deals in Lincoln Park, properties they control through trusts and shell corporations. Having you on my arm changes the dynamic. Serafina tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, keeping her locked in the dance. So this is business, she said flatly. I'm leverage. You're an opportunity. His thumb traced her spine through the fabric of her dress, sending involuntary shivers through her body. For both of us. Continue the facade tonight. Let them see you've moved on. Let them wonder what you might tell me about Marcus's affairs, his connections, his secrets. I don't know any secrets. They don't know that. Raphael's smile was predatory. Stay with me through the reception. Leave with me. Let Chicago society gossip about the widow and the mob boss. By tomorrow, the Vances will be desperate to keep you compliant, which means they'll stop trying to push you out. It was manipulation, calculated and cold, and it was also her only lifeline. And after tonight, she asked, after tonight, we will negotiate. His lips brushed her ear, and her entire body responded. But first, we survive your in-laws. They're coming. Serafina looked over his shoulder and felt her stomach drop. Daniel Vance was cutting across the dance floor with Eleanor beside him, their expressions promising war. The confrontation happened in the hallway outside the ballroom, away from the guests, but close enough that raised voices echoed back through the open doors. Have you lost your mind? Daniel grabbed Serafina's arm the moment Raphael released her, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Let go of her. Raphael's voice was quiet, deadly. Daniel ignored him, his face flushed with rage and champagne. You're embarrassing this family. Dancing with him, like some kind of... I said, let go. Raphael moved then, faster than Serafina expected, his hand clamping around Daniel's wrist with enough force that Marcus's brother gasped and released her immediately. Eleanor stepped between them, her composure cracking. Mr. Giordano, whatever game you're playing with my daughter-in-law ends now. Serafina is grieving, vulnerable, and clearly not thinking straight. I'm thinking perfectly straight, Serafina interrupted, surprising herself. For the first time in months. You don't understand what you're involving yourself in, Eleanor hissed. This man is dangerous. His family is influential, Raphael supplied smoothly. Wealthy. Connected. Everything the Vances pretend to be without the pretense of respectability. Yes, I'm aware of my reputation, Mrs. Vance. The question is, are you aware of yours? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Daniel's face went pale. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Whatever Raphael was implying, they understood it perfectly. We'll discuss this later, Serafina, Eleanor said finally, her voice ice. When you're alone. She won't be alone, Raphael said. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not until I say otherwise. He took Serafina's hand and led her back toward the ballroom, leaving the Vances standing in the hallway like statues of impotent fury. The reception ended at midnight. Raphael had stayed beside Serafina through every remaining moment. The cake cutting, the bouquet toss, the endless parade of guests offering congratulations to the bride while staring at the widow who'd somehow captured a Giordano's attention. My car is on the 3rd level, Serafina said as they exited through the lobby into the attached parking structure. The storm had passed, leaving the concrete glistening with rainwater and the air heavy with ozone. You're not driving yourself home. Raffaele's hand remained at the small of her back, proprietary and warm. I can't just leave my car. I'll have someone retrieve it tomorrow. The authority in his voice brooked no argument. Serafina was about to protest anyway when she saw them. 3 men, lean, sharp-featured, dressed in dark clothes that blended with the shadows between the fluorescent lights. They weren't walking toward her, they were positioned, waiting. Raphael saw them the same instant she did. His entire body changed, tension coiling through him like a predator preparing to strike. Get behind me, he said quietly. Now. The center man stepped forward, his smile cold beneath dead eyes. Raffaele Giordano, he said, his accent thick, Eastern European, Albanian maybe. And the pretty widow, how convenient. We've been waiting to have a conversation about Chicago's new power structure. His gaze slid to Serafina, assessing and calculating. Is she your weakness now, Giordano? Because of weaknesses in our business? He pulled a knife from his jacket, the blade catching the harsh garage lighting. They don't survive long. What happened next was a blur of violence that Serafina's mind struggled to process. Raphael moved like water, fluid, inevitable, deadly. One moment the Albanian was holding the knife. The next, he was on the ground, the blade skittering across wet concrete while Raphael's knee pressed into his spine. The other two men rushed forward, but suddenly there were other people in the garage, Raphael's men appearing from nowhere like shadows gaining substance. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Touch her again, Raphael said quietly, his voice carrying across the concrete, and I'll send your boss pieces of you in boxes. Are we clear? The Albanian nodded frantically, blood streaming from his nose. Raphael released him, straightened his suit jacket, and turned to Serafina like nothing had happened. Come. We're leaving. A black SUV pulled up, engine purring. Raphael guided her inside with a hand that was somehow still gentle despite what it had just done. She was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system, her mind replaying the knife, the violence, the casual efficiency of Raphael's response. You're safe, he said, his thumb brushing her cheek. I promise you, Serafina, you're safe. But as the SUV pulled out of the garage and merged into Chicago's late-night traffic, she wondered if safety was even possible anymore. Raphael's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in the Gold Coast, with security that rivaled federal installations, biometric scanners, armed guards in the lobby, cameras covering every angle. By the time they reached his private elevator, Serafina felt like she'd entered a fortress. The doors opened directly into his living space, and despite everything, she caught her breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan, the water dark and endless beneath the moon. The decor was minimalist but expensive. Italian leather, dark wood, modern art that probably cost more than her education. Everything was clean lines and controlled elegance, much like the man who owned it. You'll stay here, Raffaele said, shrugging off his jacket. Beneath it, she could see the gun holstered at his side. A reminder that tonight's violence wasn't an aberration. This was his life. The guest suite is on the 2nd floor. My men will be stationed outside. No one gets past them. For how long? Her voice sounded small in the vast space. Until the Albanians understand you're protected. Until I've made it clear that touching you means war. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter and handed her one. A few days, maybe a week. Serafina took the glass but didn't drink. You said this was business, leverage against the Vances, but those men in the garage, they weren't sent by my in-laws. No, Raphael's expression darkened. They were sent by Dragan Krasniki, Albanian syndicate trying to expand into Chicago. They've been pushing boundaries for months, attacking my operations, my people. He paused, his eyes finding hers. Now they've made you a target, which means they've declared war. Because you dance with me. Because I claimed you. He moved closer, setting his glass down. There's a difference, Serafina. A dance is temporary. A claim is permanent. Her breath caught. You said this was business. It was. His hand came up, fingers tracing her jawline with devastating gentleness. It's becoming something else. The admission hung between them, charged and dangerous. Outside the windows, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Serafina should have pulled away, should have maintained distance, should have remembered she was a widow, still grieving, still broken. Instead, she leaned into his touch and let herself feel alive. Serafina woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and the disorienting realization that she'd slept better than she had in 18 months. The guest suite was larger than her entire apartment had been before Marcus, all white linens and modern furniture that managed to be both luxurious and impersonal. She found Raphael in the main living area, dressed in dark slacks and a white shirt rolled to his elbows, talking quietly into his phone in rapid Italian. He ended the call when he saw her, his expression unreadable. "Coffee?" He gestured to a spread on the dining table that looked like it had been catered, pastries, fruit, espresso, in delicate cups. "Thank you." She sat, feeling awkward in last night's dress, her hair probably a disaster. "About yesterday, your husband owed money." Raphael's bluntness cut through her attempt at small talk. "A lot of it, to the wrong people." The pastry she'd been reaching for suddenly seemed unappealing. "Marcus?" Her voice cracked on his name. "That's not possible. He came from money. His family cut him off 3 years before he died." Raphael slid a folder across the table, thick with documents. He was gambling, started small, poker nights, sports betting, then offshore accounts, high-stakes games in Macau, debts that compounded faster than he could hide them. Serafina's hands shook as she opened the folder. Bank statements, wire transfers, loan agreements with names she didn't recognize, and interest rates that made her stomach turn. "The car accident," she whispered, the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. "Everyone said the brakes failed, but the police never—" The Albanian sent a message. Raphael's voice was gentle despite the brutality of his words. Marcus couldn't pay. So they took payment another way. The room tilted. Everything she'd believed about her husband, their marriage, his death, all of it was a lie. Marcus hadn't been the responsible investment banker she'd married. He'd been drowning, and he'd never told her, never warned her, never protected her from inheriting his debts. "That's why they came after me last night," she said, the truth crystallizing like ice in her veins. "Not because of you, because of Marcus. Because I'm his widow, and they think you have access to Vance family money, that Eleanor and Daniel will pay to keep their precious reputation intact." Raphael leaned back, watching her with those dark, assessing eyes. "They're not wrong. Your in-laws would rather write a check than admit their son died because of his own mistakes. But I'm not Vance. Not really." Bitterness flooded her mouth. "Eleanor's made that very clear. Which is why you need me." He stood, moving around the table until he was close enough to touch. "The Albanians won't stop Serafina. Not until someone makes them. Your in-laws won't protect you. They'll sacrifice you to save face. But I can end this. I can make you untouchable." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "All you have to do," Raffaele said softly, "is trust me." 2 hours later, Serafina found herself in a place she never imagined existing. Raphael's war room, deep in the bowels of a nondescript warehouse in Little Italy. The space was all concrete and steel, with a massive table surrounded by men who looked like they could kill with their bare hands. And at the head of that table sat Dragan Krasniki himself. The Albanian was older than she'd expected, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, flanked by bodyguards, who made the men from the parking garage look like amateurs. When Raffaele entered with Serafina at his side, Dragan's gaze flickered with surprise, then calculation. "You brought the widow," he said, his accent thick. "How sentimental." "I brought my woman," Raphael corrected, his hand settling possessively at Serafina's waist. "Who you threatened, who you tried to use as leverage." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dragan leaned back, smiling without warmth. "Your woman inherited debts, her husband." "My husband made mistakes." Serafina heard herself speak before conscious thought caught up. Every head turned toward her. "Mistakes that got him killed. Mistakes I knew nothing about." Raphael's fingers tightened at her waist. Warning or support, she couldn't tell. "But here's what I do know," she continued, her voice steadier than her racing heart. "You want Chicago territory. Raffaele controls the ports you need for distribution. The Vance family controls real estate. You want to legitimize your operations. I'm the only person in this room connected to both sides." Dragon's eyes narrowed with interest. "So instead of turning me into another casualty," Serafina said, channeling every ounce of courage she possessed, "maybe you should consider me an asset. I can broker access to Vance properties in exchange for my husband's debts being forgiven and my safety guaranteed." The silence stretched like razor wire. Then Dragon laughed, a genuine sound that echoed off concrete walls. "She has fire, Giordano. I see why you claimed her." He stood, extending his hand across the table. "You have a deal, Mrs. Vance. Your debts die with your husband. Your safety is assured, and you'll facilitate introductions to your in-laws' holdings." Raphael took the offered hand, sealing the agreement. But his eyes, when they found Serafina's, burned with something that looked dangerously like pride. Eleanor Vance arrived at Raphael's penthouse 3 days later with lawyers, demands, and the entitlement of old money facing new power. She swept past security like she owned the building, Daniel trailing behind with his perpetual scowl. "This ends now, Serafina." Eleanor's voice echoed through the marble foyer. "Whatever spell this man has cast, whatever threats he's made, you're coming home. The brownstone, your allowance, your place in this family depends on your compliance." Serafina stood beside Raphael on the staircase, looking down at the woman who'd made her feel small for 2 years. But she didn't feel small anymore. "I don't want the brownstone," she said quietly, "or your allowance, or my place in a family that only valued me when Marcus was alive to give me worth." Eleanor's face flushed crimson. "You ungrateful! We gave you everything!" "You gave me a cage," Serafina corrected. "Mrs. Vance." Raffaele's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Your son's gambling debts have been settled. The Albanians have been paid. Serafina owes you nothing, legally, morally, or otherwise." "You have no authority," Daniel started. "I have every authority." Raphael descended the stairs with predatory grace, pulling a folder from his jacket. "Including documentation of your family's money laundering through Marcus's investment firm, your shell corporations in the Caymans, your tax evasion spanning 15 years. Eleanor went pale. "That's privileged information that I now possess." Raphael's smile was cold. "Touch Serafina again, threaten her, even speak her name without respect, and the IRS receives everything. Your empire crumbles, your reputation dies. Choose wisely." The Vances left without another word, their power finally broken against something harder. When the elevator doors closed, Serafina turned to Raphael, her heart racing. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You're mine, Serafina, not theirs, not Marcus's memory, mine." The possessiveness should have frightened her. Instead, it ignited something fierce in her chest. "I'm not a possession," she whispered, but didn't pull away. "No," Raphael agreed, his lips hovering inches from hers. "You're the woman I'm keeping. There's a difference." When he kissed her, it felt like choosing life over grief, power over fear, a new beginning written in fire and trust, and the dangerous promise of belonging to someone who would burn the world to keep her safe. Serafina woke up wrapped in Raffaele's arms, the city spread beneath them like conquered territory. Sunlight painted the bedroom gold, but it was the weight of his hand on her hip, possessive even in sleep, that made her breath catch. She should have been terrified, should have questioned every choice that led her here. Instead, she felt free. "You're thinking too loud," Raphael murmured against her neck, his voice rough with sleep. "Tell me." "I'm staying." The words came easily, surprising her with their certainty. "Not because I'm afraid or need protection, but because I choose this, choose you." His grip tightened, pulling her closer. "Even knowing what I am, what does my life demand? Especially knowing." She turned in his arms, meeting those dark eyes that had seen violence and commanded empires. "Marcus kept me in a gilded prison. You see me as an equal, as someone capable of standing beside you." "Capable of ruling beside me?" Raphael corrected, his thumb tracing her lower lip. Chicago needs a queen, Serafina. Not a widow hiding from life, not a victim. A partner who understands power and isn't afraid to wield it. Her heart stuttered at the implication. That's quite a promotion from Table 9, she whispered. His smile was slow, dangerous, devastating. You were never meant for Table 9, amore. You were meant for this, for me. From the moment I saw you sitting alone, I knew you were mine to claim, mine to keep, mine to crown. Outside, Chicago gleamed with possibility and danger in equal measure. And Serafina Vance, no longer just a widow, no longer just Marcus's forgotten legacy, kissed the mob boss who'd given her back her life and claimed him right back.